I would like to welcome you to this presentation of our paper on the visual comparison of multi-label classification results. My name is Cedric Krause, and the co-authors who worked with me on this paper are Shivam Agarwal, Mohammad, Ghoniem, and Fabian Beck. What are multi-label classification results? To understand that, we first need to understand multi-label classifications. And one example for that is depicted on this slide. We have an item, in this case an image, that is then given to a model. This could be a machine learning model, like in the application examples I will show later, but it could also be a human processing the input. As a result, we receive a list of labels that are assigned to the item, depending on the objects that the model identifies. But what happens if we give the same item to multiple models? It is likely that those opinions differ on which labels to assign to that item. And if we not only do this for one item, but for a whole data set of items, there are going to be different relationships that form within each classification result between the labels and how they assign them. And these relationships are what we are interested in this work. Not only the relationships within one classification result, but also how these relationships differ between the models. This can lead to a better understanding of the models and can help improve the models in the long run, although the subsequent improvements of the models are not part of this work. This is fundamentally a set membership problem, but we transform it for our work to leverage graph comparison techniques. In this example, we have one set L1 and another set L2, colored in orange and blue here respectively. The overlap is colored in gray, and it encompasses all the items that were assigned label L1 and label L2. Now, to put this into a graph, we decided on a bipartite representation where each label is present twice, once as a source node on the left side and once as a target node on the right side. The links can only go from a source node to a target node. The thickness of the links is determined by the asymmetrical Jacquard similarity. So now we have to divide the overlap by the size of the source label. In this case, we see the overlap is rather small compared to the size of set L1, and therefore the link that is drawn is rather thin. However, on the other way around, label L2 is the source and label L1 is the target. And we can see that the overlap is almost as large as the whole set of label L2, and therefore the link that is drawn will be much thicker. Now, there could be other classification results where these label overlaps are completely different. For example, there are no items that were assigned to label L1 and L2, and therefore no lines would be drawn. And there are a myriad of other possibilities here. But before I show you a demo of the tool that we developed, I want to lay out some analysis questions that we have identified to determine what we are actually interested in with our analysis. We have three categories that are differentiated by the scope of the information they concern. Within each of these categories, the questions are sorted by their complexity. First are the questions concerning the items and their labels over different results. More specifically, the first question asks which are the most frequent labels in the data set. The second one asks whether different models have assigned the same labels to the same items. And if so, how large is their agreement? Are there just a few items? Are there 50% of them? Or maybe all of them have the same labels? Lastly, we're also interested in checking the labels of one specific item. And in this case, we also want to see the raw data for that one specific item. Next are the questions concerning the relationships of labels within one result. We are interested in the label overlap relationships that are drawn or shown by the links as we discussed earlier. We're also interested in special relationships that form between the labels, especially subset relationships or hierarchies. Lastly, we're also interested if there are clusters within one multi-label classification result. So are there labels that are only connected with other labels within the cluster, but not, or very rarely, connected with labels outside this cluster? And the third one is the logical continuation of the first two. Here we are interested in the relationships of labels, but over different results. So we take the insights we gathered in the category 2, and now we compare them over the different multi-label classification results. So especially we're interested in the similarity of the overlap relationships at form and also the similarity of clusters. This is the prototype from our paper on the visual comparison of multi-label classification results. In the top left, we can see a short introduction about the purpose of this prototype. Next to that, we see a drop-down to select the dataset we visualize. For this video, we will look at the Food Recognition Challenge debug dataset that is also used in the second application example of our paper. I'm going to talk about the other two controls sections at a later point. The main part of our prototype is the result comparison view. It has a tabular layout where the labels that can be assigned to the data items are represented as the rows, while the columns represent the different multi-labeling results we want to compare. In this dataset, we have 5 selected results from the top contestants of the Food Recognition Challenge and the ground truth. For each label, we can see 2 metrics. The first is the average number of times the label was assigned overall multi-labeling results. The second value is the average disagreement between the multi-labeling results regarding this label. A higher value means that there is more disagreement. Each column is vertically subdivided. On the left, we see the number of items the label of each row is assigned within this particular multi-labeling result. On the right of the column, we see a node link diagram that shows the relationships between labels. In each row, we see 2 boxes, one on the left and one on the right, both of which represent the same label. Links are always read from left to right, which makes the graphs directed. The thickness of a link encodes the asymmetric Jacquard similarity between the labels that are connected. Hence, the label coffee has a strong asymmetric Jacquard similarity with the label water. However, the other way, from water to coffee, no link is drawn. The reason is that the overlap of the 2 labels is not as significant for the label water, because it was assigned to more items overall. This is also visually explained in this figure. The minimum similarity for a link to be drawn can be adjusted in the controls. If we select a label, the row will be colored in turquoise. In the columns, we see small bars in every cell that is not in the selected row. It shows the overlap between the items that were also assigned the selected label within that multi-labeling result. Vice versa, we can also select a multi-labeling result which colors the column in blue. The small bars now show the overlap of items with the same label in other results. If we select a row and column at the same time, the cell at their intersection is colored black. Now the small bars show the overlap of items with the selected cell, even if the sets described different labels in different results. When a column is selected, we can also use the graph diff feature to highlight differences between the graph in the selected result and the other ones. We can show the links from the selected result, which are missing in the other graphs. We can also highlight the links in each graph that are not present in the selected one. We also have the option to cluster the labels and the results in the dataset. This rearranges rows and columns to put more similar ones closer together and adds gaps between them if the distance surpasses a certain threshold. If we select a specific cell, we get more information about the items of that selection. In this selection detail view, we can see a histogram which shows us how many items in the selection were assigned with a certain number of labels. This is the longest bar, and left of the axis we see 3 dots, so we can infer that the majority of these 20 items were assigned 3 labels in this multi-labeling result. At the bottom, we have the item detail view that shows us the individual items from the selection along with the specific labels that were assigned in each result. The labels are encoded in this pixel map that allows us to observe certain patterns. We can click on an item in the list, which will give us the actual names of the assigned labels and also gives us a preview of the data item itself. We can use this to judge for ourselves whether the label assignments are correct. We've also done an evaluation of our prototype with 2 experts. The data we just saw in the demo was from the AI Crowd Food Recognition Challenge. and the two experts were also from the AI crowd community. The first one was a member of the evaluation team for that very challenge, while the other one was a challenge participant who scored in the top 10. We found that the two experts were using very different perspectives on the tool. While the evaluation team member was very focused on comparing submissions to the ground truth, the challenge participant was frequently comparing his own solutions to those of others, and especially how they differed. We also observed that both users did not focus on a small subset of features they were comfortable with, but they were actually trying to use all the functionality that we implemented very frequently within their analysis. The users also reported that using our prototype helped them to better understand not only the submissions, but also the dataset itself. In the following 2 slides, I want to show 2 of their findings in a bit more detail, but before I do, I want to mention that there is another dataset that we evaluated with 2 other experts, which has produced findings that can be found in the paper as well. So one of the insights in more detail was found when one of the users selected the label carrot in one of the classification results, and he immediately saw the strong relationship between carrot and the label salad. He then looked at the selection detail view and observed that most of these items that were assigned carrot were not just assigned 2 labels, but actually 3. And interested in that, he looked at the item detail view and he observed a pattern in the pixel maps that we can see in the bottom right now. And it is not only the frequent co-occurrence of 2 labels, but actually 3 labels. And those 3 labels are carrot, salad, and mixed salad, which makes sense because a machine learning model might confuse salad with mixed salad, as the images may be not so clear on what kind of salad there is. The next one concerns different strategies that were used by different teams in the challenge. Here we can see the team that ended up in 10th place. And we right away see that they did not assign many of the labels. Actually, they only assigned 4 out of the top 20 labels. The users assumed that this model was probably not trained on all of the available labels. Still, the team managed to do well on precision and recall, which were the evaluation metrics for this challenge. The team that scored first paints a very different picture. There are a lot of links in this graph, which means there are a lot of label overlaps. The evaluation team member actually told us that this was possible due to a problem that they identified only weeks into the challenge, and he told us that with our prototype he was able to identify this problem much earlier. So let's discuss the benefits and limitations of our prototype. The analysis questions that we posed earlier can be answered very well with our system. However, for some questions, especially the one regarding the special relationships like hierarchies, the results remain rather shallow. Our approach scales very well with the number of items, however not so well with the number of labels and results. As with a rising number of labels and results, the rows and columns become increasingly squeezed and convoluted. We have addressed this problem in the paper and post some ideas on how to fix it in the future. Lastly, our approach is only applicable if all classification results use the same items, so they have seen the same images, and also if the label spaces are the same. Right now, it is not possible to compare 2 different models where one assigned the label dog and another one assigned the label hound. I would like to conclude this presentation by naming our main contributions. First is the identification of those abstract analysis questions I posed earlier. Second is the transformation of that set membership problem to a graph comparison problem to leverage the visual techniques we have for those. And lastly, we have proposed a solution design and implemented a fully functioning prototype. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to attend to your questions now.